Thank you, everyone, for joining the 360 Insights Elevate Channel Talks. I am here with Kelli Ballou McMillan. Super excited that she accepted our invitation to join us today. Kelli is the Director of Global Partners of TSBs, TSDs at Five9, and we are so honored to have her on our call today. She is also the founder of the Exposure, Culture, and Belonging Council, to which I actually just left their amazing Meet the Board call. Kelli, I am so excited. It's perfect timing, having sat on that call and learning a lot more about what your organization is doing outside of Five9. I'm excited for what's in store with our conversation as we talk about DE&I and belonging and culture in the channel. But before we even dive in, just give us a little introduction of who you are.
Yeah, thank you first for inviting me to this space, Akilah. We've known each other from a channel perspective, and I feel like even have grown our friendship over the last few years. So I just appreciate you thinking of me to join and come talk to your community. So Kelli Ballou McMillan, native Houstonian, which if you've been following any of the real estate trends lately, we are the up and coming booming city for folks to come from all over the country and really the world, having one of the largest healthcare communities here too. So I'm a native Houstonian. I moved back right before COVID. And what I feel like is unique for me is I was a banker coming out of undergrad. I was a banker. I lived all over the country. I lived in DC, I lived in Seattle. And when I moved to the Bay Area, I had to pivot into now it's telecommunications, and I worked for a TSD at the time. And when we moved out to the Bay Area, and for the last 6 years, I've been over at Five9, a SaaS-based contact center as a service organization, helping referral route to market, sales partners, resale route to market, partners understand how to leverage our technology and sell it to their customers. And somewhere in between there, I've been here about 6 years now. Somewhere in between there, I realized that this channel space not only was a great group of people, I believe that there are so many like yourself and others who are on my board, others who I spend time with, who I make a point to spend time with outside of work events, right? We have some really amazing people within our community. And also, we had an opportunity to bring in more amazing people into our community. And I wanted to be intentional about that, showing up into rooms where I was the only person who looked like me sometimes. And we talk about intersectionality. Sometimes I'm the only woman that is in the room, right? And that could go on for days at an event or something like this. And this was 10 years ago when I entered the channel. And I wanted to be intentional about creating space for others to come into this space. And then also making sure that they felt safe as they navigated this space. They have somebody to help them navigate. And also they felt welcomed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is when we kicked off Xposure. I got a couple of my very close friends together at the time, two of which, Brandon Knight and Jamal Savoir, and another young lady who has since exited the channel. But we all sat down at a channel partner show in 2019. And what was supposed to be an hour-long lunch ended up being like 4 hours,
Oh,
where we talked
wow.
about all of our experiences, how we came to know this space. A lot of us, mine was a blind Craigslist ad. Brandon had been working in contact centers, so he didn't know that he could get paid for the referrals that he had been doing. Jamal was a solutions engineer who was tasked with some channel org route to market when he was back at Star to Star. And so we all kind of just fell into this space, but we knew we wanted to make it more welcoming. And we launched at the end of that year, and Exposure's been around for a while now. We've had it's been a wild ride. It's been an amazing ride. But we've made a huge impact on our channel, and we hope to do so as we continue to move on into 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, you all have made a huge impact, and I want to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But I could just hear your passion Your passion really, it's exposure is more like that bridge, if you will, of what, your career path to showing up as who you are and just being yourself. And I love that this organization is in place. I wish it was in place when I was much younger. I'm not going to talk about my age. I just had a birthday, but we're not going to talk about that. No, but honestly, like when I first started my career, I wish I had that kind of support system. So the importance of exposure is just above and beyond what you can even think, Kelly, because
Yeah.
it's really changing lives, it's impacting lives. Before we dive into that, though, I want to know because I feel like I'm getting to know you better, and I see the passion come through. I'm curious what your first job was. I know you talked about you were in the banking industry. I want to talk about your first job, but I want you to hone in on a skill that something that you learned early on in your career that
Yeah.
has contributed to your success, and even something that maybe that you still do to this day, but you learned from your first job.
Okay, so my first job, can we talk first job and then first corporate job?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go.
Um, we so my parents are professionals. My mom's a banker. My stepmom worked, she's an analyst and a project manager now, but she worked in a communities and development kind of role. My mom was the person who built community within her company as a banker right before HR took over that responsibility. And my dad is also from the IT side of the house, but he's a community builder too. And then before them, all their parents were entrepreneurs. So I say that to say my first job was in the classroom. I must have been like in middle school where I was selling candy. My parents were like, you want something extra, you have to figure it out, right? Like if
Yeah,
you want something extra for your clothes, I ran track. So like I always had cool tennis shoes because that was just a thing before it
right.
was a thing. And so anything I wanted to do, it was babysitting and selling candy. So before, like after Christmas, after Valentine's Day, when the candy went on sale, your candy lady was around, and that's what I did. So that was
Okay.
like my
Okay.
first job. I actually made quite a bit of money reselling candy to a point where when my parents figured it out, they started to invest in that. So, this sense of community and investment is always something that has been around me. My first, I would say, corporate job or space where I worked in an office was working for I went to high school for law enforcement and criminal justice. So my passion comes from building equity for people from that lens. And I've been that way since I was younger. And so I got to work at a law firm in high school. I was like 16.
Oh, wow.
And it was part of our professional development at the time. And this law firm was a mix of folks. It was a very small law firm. It was like 40 people at the time. They're since grown tremendously. And they handled Mercedes-Benz claims. And so for their cars and any,
Yeah.
challenges that folks were having. And one of the things that I learned in that role was it takes a community of people to come together to get something done, right? And so what I mean by that is it was every interaction that a customer had with our law firm at the time
Mhm.
was an amazing experience. First, it was a small law firm, so you can kind of gauge and build the culture that you wanted. Also, it was from the time you called in to the time you talked to the paralegal to the time you talked to the lawyer to getting in front of a judge, all those things. Everybody knew what their roles were,
Mhm.
and that's really, it was like this orchestration of sorts, and it was the best way that um I guess I can experience and kind of leverage what I'm trying to build and what I see our world really looking like is us all working together for a greater good. And we did that in that office. Those are some relationships. Also, it showed me the power of partnership in within a space and external to. We had to work with a ton of partners to get things to fruition. Like we had to work with a ton of partners to get the details that we need to be able to try a case. And then also, they took an invested interest into my life. They showed up to my high school graduation. Like they took pictures. There was one of my mentor at the time. I didn't even know, I knew she was there, but
Mhm.
she took pictures from a ton of different vantage points. And she dropped that. That was my gift like a week later. She got them all developed. You guys remember actual cameras, right? Like she got them all developed. She dropped them off. And I thought that that was so empowering. And that's one of the first times that I had an active mentor, which is why I'm so passionate about being an active mentor for others, because I know how much that opened up my world and how, yes, we all have our own roles and things that we're doing, but an act of kindness can really help broaden someone else's horizons. And I don't mean that to sound cliche, but just knowing that someone else could take the time to do that for me, I knew I wanted to share that act of kindness in whatever way I could for those in my community as well.
Wow. That just that's so powerful because it's who you are. Community, if I were to think of one word, there's many for you, but honestly, you are all about community. You're bringing people together. And you mentioned mentorship. You know, you're walking in your purpose. It's very clear. So having said that, and your sense of community and bringing people together from your perspective, how crucial is fostering DEI&B culture? How crucial is mentorship play a part or play a role within an organization?
Oh my goodness, it literally sets the tone, right? When you have an organization, I always like to call it it's a meet cute, right? One of my favorite movies, The Holiday. There's a character in that, and he's a film writer.
Mhm,
And he's talking about this meet cute where a guy and a woman are in the department store and they're looking for PJs.
mhm.
The woman needs the top and the guy needs the bottom, and they meet at the register, and then they have, this whole beautiful life unfolds, all the things.
Right.
Well, a meet cute is not very different in a corporate space or in any community organization where leadership and also the front line,
Mhm,
there's a middle person in the middle, and a lot of times that's what we call middle management. If middle management isn't in alignment with what leadership wants, and
mhm.
also is listening to what their front line, I'll call them that. I was a teller before. And, if they're not listening, then they can make or break culture in an organization, right? And so the fact that where mentorship comes in is you have to have someone from a leadership perspective. They might not be executive, they might not be your CEO, but someone that understands the company's culture to mentor that middle management group so
Mhm.
that they can foster good responsibilities within the front line and also reflect what leadership wants. Now, mentorship should happen throughout your organization because you want that top down approach and bottom up approach to happen fluidly. But if you had to start anywhere, it would be your middle management team because they help to set the tone for how everybody interacts with you.
Right. Now, what would you say though to an individual who does not? So let's say it's not even happening from the top down, bottom up. No one like the culture is just dead. DEI is non-existent. But what if you're a passionate individual who sees the need for just to be kind, first of all, and to treat other people just human, right? And you're
Yeah.
the only one, or maybe the minority, maybe there's only a few of you. What do you do in that case when you don't have the support from the top or any resources? Where do you begin? Where do you go? What do you do?
Here's the thing. So I'm gonna back up a little bit on your query is because one of the on this call that we had where we met the board, the moderator, a good friend of mine, Renell, asks why we transition from culture and belonging. And so I think that sets the tone a little bit for the question that you're asking.
Mm,
Um, Culture and belonging encompasses everybody, right? It encompasses the Caribbean Black woman who identifies as queer. That's 3 points of intersection
mhm,
as how that person is showing up in the world. And when they come in to do their engineering job within an organization, they want to just be seen as who they are and respected for the work that they're going to contribute to the greater good of the organization. If you're saying that an organization, so we steered a little bit away from DE&I because yes, culture and belonging fosters those same things. So it's really a wordplay.
mhm,
However, what it does is, to your point, Akilah, your query around how can we help that one person who doesn't see any of these attributes within their organization, is we reframing it hopefully takes away the pointing fingers of who needs to do what, but also invites that everybody has a unique background and they want to be seen and heard and valued when they come into spaces where ultimately we work for other companies to make them money and to make ourselves money to manage our lifestyles. Otherwise, we'd all be out farming or chasing butterflies, right?
Right.
So for that person who needs culture and belonging, obviously, we'd love for you to reach out to Xposure. We have a culture index that we've created that we'll be pushing out later this month, a survey that you can take to answer those questions and hopefully give those results to someone that you trust within your organization to help you navigate and see what type of support you need. But until then, I would say that you should also look at someone in your organization that you can trust, that you can share these things with. And if you don't trust anyone in your organization, say you haven't built that relationship yet, but you see a gap, bring it to leadership, right? Whether your leadership, I believe that C&B should be separate from HR. HR has a different level of metrics that they should be looking at. And culture and belonging is really the vision, the community for the organization. And you should bring that to a leader that you trust, that it won't fall on deaf ears.
Right.
Also, there's a ton of other resources, right? We would like to be a resource for you, but Google is an amazing resource to help you navigate. I took a class at Cornell on navigating and building out DE&I or C&B organizations. And there's always something. And I think the fact that you have recognized whoever this, you is, but the fact that someone recognizes that their organization has a gap means that there's an opportunity to fill it.
Absolutely. And you're right. There's no excuse. There's a ton of resources now. There really isn't. And especially, I don't want to talk about that with regards to Xposure. I know we've spoken about the importance of the organization and being that bridge. Like, was there anything in your career or any experience that you personally experienced, or maybe even people on the board, where you just were like, there's nothing for us? And so where do people go? And I know that's how Xposure was birthed, but is there any example that you can think of that maybe our audience can relate to? There could be someone listening to this conversation saying, that's exactly what I'm going through right now.
Yeah, so that's a twofold space for me, because one, I have been extremely blessed. Look, not working in corporate and working in that space is not always rainbows and sunshine. However, navigation of and through an organization and how to, do the things, I've been blessed that I've had amazing mentors at a lot of organizations that helped formed this version of me that you see today, right? Now I'm always curious. So that helps a lot too. That helps bridge that gap between a mentor and mentee, and open-minded. However, I believe that mentorship has really shaped who I am and why Xposure is what it is in this space. What I didn't expect, or the opportunity for us a few years ago was how many people did not feel included and navigated the halls of what we call the indirect sales channel and felt like they were just out on a buoy by themselves in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
I remember coming off stage at an industry event where we talked about Xposure, and it was just on the early onset of, and there were 3 people. I didn't even get out of the room. We had to exit the room. There was a couple hundred people in the room. I had to exit the room. And then there was a line of people waiting to talk to me to share their stories, right? Stories of how they had someone that they reported to who belittled the slave trade, right? Who were like, oh, I see why you're not, just unimaginable experiences that from peer to peer, from manager to peer, right? Or manager to employee. Also, I had, people talk about their concern for navigating this space just from an upwards career trajectory. right? Maybe they didn't have the same relationships that others did, and they weren't giving just an opportunity to try at something, and they had to earn it, and their earning would look different than maybe someone else, a peer of theirs, right? Um, and that's when I knew that we were doing the right thing and
Yeah.
that we were speaking up for those who didn't feel comfortable using their voice,
Mhm.
because not everybody has a two-income household. Let's be honest. Not everybody has. Sometimes this career that you have is the career that takes care of more than just your household. If you come from an underprivileged community
Right.
and an underserved community,
Right.
right? And so this is, we are, my board, the people that are members of Xposure are okay shouldering some of that weight so
Mhm.
that you can move forward. And then also your stories share the impact that the initiatives that we push
Mhm.
um, hopefully help others as they navigate too, because there might be things that somebody else might have experienced, or we just don't want anyone else to experience. So why not try to head it off before it starts?
Absolutely. And I think even just creating the space for people to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first step is oftentimes, I know back, I hate saying this back in my generation, but it's true. Like early on, we didn't talk about our hardships, our challenges. I never spoke to anyone about how I felt as a Black woman in corporate. I felt it. I knew I was the token individual. And like you, I've been blessed. I've had many amazing advocates, and I'm grateful for that. But there were
Yeah.
times when I knew I couldn't just bring who I was to the table, whether it had to do with my hair, my dress, being
Mm-hmm.
maybe too loud because it's the angry, loud Black woman in the conference room. Like there were so many things, and I never spoke about those things until 2020.
Yeah.
That's 20 plus years of my career. And so
Yeah.
now that's why I just really appreciate Xposure for normalizing those conversations and keeping them going. Because a lot of times too, we kind of we're good at reacting, right? Everybody reacted to George Floyd, and it was a very painful experience, but I'm grateful for the conversations we've had since then and the doors it's opened. But I've also noticed how people have just kind of dwindled off. Like that's done now for them. DEI, cultural and belonging, that's just like a check mark for them, or that's done. That was just a trend. And Xposure is here to stay. This is a long-term organization. This is a lifestyle. This is not just going to be your little check mark. And I love the fact that you're willing to partner with organizations to normalize treating other people fairly.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is again, another point of intersectionality for me is I work for a organization where we talk about the human experience, right?
Mhm.
And we
Mhm.
talk about that from interacting with your customer in the way that they want to be interacted with. We talk about the agent experience from how agents interact with our software to be able to help the customers and what that means equal to a human experience.
Right.
So what's unique for me is that this should be our human experience. We should be working as a community, as a collective to increase the and I don't want to just say the happiness, but like increase the level and elevate in the way that we interact with each other as humans. Because then you're not reactive. We don't see these series of injustices, these biases, harassment. We don't see these things happen. And they start to happen smaller and smaller, right? In small, not smaller scales, because the impact is trauma,
Mhm.
but they start to dwindle off in the fact that we're going to treat each other better as humans. The
Right.
other thing is, I'm a brown skinned Black woman. There is no taking this off. I don't get a season where I decide to take off.
Right. Right.
And this is a marathon. And I am a marathon runner. My first marathon was in 2019 in Paris. So shout out, I am a marathoner. And
Yeah.
I understand that this is what my work is,
Mhm.
community, so that when my sons come along, they don't have to do this level of work. They can
Yeah.
do another iteration of, right?
Right.
And so to make this space as equitable as possible, so I can just move around and I can talk about butterflies and flowers and not have to talk about injustices or the wealth gap, which is something also that's very important to Xposure is, the wealth gap that happens from a tech and telecommunications perspective because we're left out of that conversation.
Right. Absolutely. And, coming off the call again, I'm sorry, I keep referring to the call because it was really good, very informative, and that's why you all did it. But you talked about some of the highlights over the years that Xposure has been a huge part of. I want to talk about two of those things because I don't know that our audience, specifically, I'm talking 360 Insights, this podcast, even knows about the shift that
Yeah.
Xposure was instrumental in. I want you to talk a little bit about it, talking about the former terminology as master agents and how you rebranded it and why you did. I want to talk about that, and then I also want to talk about the code of conduct. So if you don't mind, just taking a few minutes to share with our audience.
Sure. We'll start with the initial initiative. And so it's what was interesting is when I entered the channel in 2014, into 2014, going into 2015, I like I said, I applied via a blind Craigslist ad. And I found out the reason why I took this job, let me back up a little bit. The reason why I took this opportunity was because I found out I was pregnant with my youngest. And we were living in like Napa Valley area, Sonoma County. And I really wanted to go be the executive director at a winery. But, I'm from the South and a real job was going to pay the bills because I've never seen this, right? Representation is impactful. And so I took this job at a master agent, and which was what was interesting about that Brian Craigslist ad is that they never said that. They said they were a telecommunications, how did they say, distributor or something like that at the time. And then when I got there, that's not how they referred to themselves. They were, and not how anyone else referred to them. It was master agent this, master agent that. And so when I went to explain it to my family, it was like, wait, but when I go do research, it says master agent. What is this master agent, right? And so I'm reframing it from the get, because if you can imagine the term master anything, especially in the Americas, is a very polarizing terminology. And also, if we want to look at it from a business perspective, it does not describe what these brokers do from a referral entrepreneurs side of the house or a vendor side of the house. They're managing a relationship between entrepreneurs and vendors and service providers. What is a master agent, right? I also thought that it was interesting. So that's one. The second is I thought it was interesting that we started to pivot before my transition over to Five9 to sales partner, right? So we were already comfortable not calling a partner an agent any longer, but we kept the terminology master agent to sales partner, right? So that hierarchy. And so after starting Xposure 2020, obviously where the world stopped and actually, I believe, looked at each other from a human lens and perspective, at least for a short while, the complete focus was there. We started to have safe spaces, conversations where we could talk about all the things. And it came up time over time that not only was I peeved about it and didn't understand it, others were saying as they entered into this space that they were having a hard time describing why we were utilizing a terminology that was so outdated. The last kind of piece was real
I have a
estate.
quick question for you right there. The others who came to you and said they were uncomfortable with it, were these legacy folks like within the channel, or were these,
They were mixed.
okay.
Yep, there
Curious.
were mixed. There were brand new people coming into the space, but then some of the people that, we've known that's been in here, been in the channel for 5, 10, 15 years, started to share that they were extremely uncomfortable with that terminology and always have been, but didn't have another, words are impactful. They didn't have another word for it at the time. And so they would just call, these brokers, these TSDs, they just call them by their name, right? They try every convention not to say master agent.
Right.
And sometimes when you get new words, you have to use and adopt new words. So that brings me to the last kind of piece before our board wrote this letter is the real estate market. They changed from master bedroom
Mhm.
to primary bedroom.
Mhm.
Okay. If
Mhm.
an entire market in an industry that is global can adjust because of the impact of words, then why can't we? So
Right.
late that year, going into 21, we had quite a bit of debate internally as a board on if this is something that we wanted to do. And it was erring on the side of courage,
Mhm.
erring on the side of what is right, and also what is descriptive and of what a business actually is doing. And so we wrote this letter to the top TSDs in our space, and we asked them if they could reconsider their names and choose anything else, just
Mhm.
not their agent. At the time, it's interesting when it first came out, and there was this very quick adoption. So shout out to the TSDs; they took this as an opportunity to rebrand and reframe as well. And so you had hybrid IT distributor, you had technology solutions broker, you had technology solutions distributor, you had all these different ones. And literally last year they all came to a consensus. It took about 3 years,
Yeah.
and now the market is, or that particular service community is called a TSD, so a
Right.
technology services distributor. And we couldn't be happier for it, because now when people interact with us, when we look at partnerships, even bringing new vendors into this space outside from that are maybe HQ'd in other countries,
Mhm.
there's no explanation of why the term master agent. It's just oh, they're a distributor of technology and telecommunication services. Let's go sign up with them.
Right. Absolutely. And I have to tell you, I rarely, if any, if I ever hear it
Yeah.
of that terminology of a master agent, like you all just eradicate it, like it's gone. So that's a huge win because usually, and
It
that's why
is.
it's a recent change. It takes
It
folks,
is.
especially folks who've been in the channel, they've been in this for years and years, just to just shift their thinking. I mean, huge.
And it's not just the thinking too. I love that you brought that up, but it's in our daily conversations. It is
Absolutely.
in contracts. Hundreds of thousands of contracts had to be changed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's I'm not a big person about ego, but
Mhm.
if I had to rest my, you know, what have my impact, my organization's impact,
Absolutely.
our organization's impact, because it's a community, it would be on the initiatives that we have pushed, because we were genuine in our ask. It wasn't about ego.
Yeah.
And we were sincere. Like, let's think about this from a broader lens, from a greater lens. We have PE that has entered the chat, as
Right.
the young
Right.
folks say. We
Yeah.
have we have the other spaces that are trying to enter it here. Let's call a thing a thing. What are we actually providing for a bridge between entrepreneurs and vendor and service providers?
Mhm.
And so, it's not lost on me the work that they had to do to change that naming convention and the amount of contracts. Even 5 9 had to update our contracts. All the vendors had to update their contracts. All of the TSDs had to update their contracts, their websites, any further future articles that they put out.
Right.
It's a lot of work. And
And it's
kudos to
been being
the
done.
market for taking it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, kudos to you. I mean, honestly, yes. I think that's one of the biggest achievements. Not the biggest one yet, though. I believe there's going to be more, but this was huge. Oh my God, we can talk there's so many more things I want to talk to
Now
you
we
about.
talk.
Like we have to do like a part two, because there's even things like innovation, like how does, cultural and belonging, and how does that impact innovation, even AI right now? That's a whole nother conversation in itself when you think about diversity, right? And cultural belonging, just where we are currently with AI. I think we have to have like a follow-up conversation. One last question I want to ask you though is really for advice for advocates. What advice would you to the advocate? What advice would you give to the advocate today on how they
Um,
can make an impact?
I love how you talked about there's so many ways that you can be an advocate. There's so many pieces of this human experience that we can elevate, right? And what I would say to an advocate is one, what are you passionate about? It might not be technology and telecommunications. It might be healthcare systems and the equity of women of color as they experience and they traverse through the healthcare system when they're caring or with child, right? A lot of people of color live in food deserts, right? How can you help make sure that there are enough grocery stores or public communities for gardening communities, right? So people can go get fresh, have access to fresh fruits and veggies. Um, Passions run the gamut of how we want you, or excuse me, your passion can run the gamut of how you want to impact the world, but figure out that first.
Yeah.
And I say that's the first thing, figure out your passion, and then put on a seatbelt. You know how you get for a road trip
Yeah.
and you pack up all the things and you get your snacks and you know, even if you're the passenger driver, right? You're the passenger rider, there's a responsibility to the driver, right? You got to help them pull the paper back on that burger while they're driving. You make sure that their drinks are refilled, right? Because not every advocate wants to lead from the front. Figure out where you want to lead. So that's the second one. How do you want to impact? Do you want to spearhead your own initiative or do you want to support an initiative that's already out there? And 3, settle in. So that's what I mean by that, you know, figure out where you're going, what you're passionate about. 2, how you want to impact. Are you going to, you know, ride shotgun or are you going to drive and steer the initiative? And then 3, settle in, because like a marathon, the work that we're doing to elevate the human experience is a journey. And it's like taking a trip from Seattle down to Florida. It's going to take a while and you should settle in and get comfortable and figure out the learnings along the way, notate those and be willing to share those with other mentors who are passionate, who are riding space, as have maybe chosen a similar journey to yours.
Yeah, so good. I can't even add to it. I would just emphasize the fact, your point number 1. You got what is your passion? And that'll drive everything. And I think that also brings back the follow through and the commitment to what you're passionate about. So powerful. Kelli, there's so much more I did want to talk to you about, but I think we can stop here and I feel like you can come back and we can continue the conversation. But I really hope, and I know for sure our audience will definitely walk away from this conversation with something that they've learned, right? Maybe some upskilling. They knew a little about, we hear about DEI&B, but what about we hear about DEI, but what about culture and belonging? And then hopefully they've learned quite a bit about Xposure, because that is dedicated to the channel. That's dedicated to really highlighting and elevating, you know, DEI experiences within the channel. I think that's important that people know that this organization exists specifically for us, and it's truly a community. So I thank you for your time. I know you're busy, busy. So I appreciate the time you took to chat with us today.
Yeah, and if I would leave your community with anything is that their Xposure is doing quite a few things. Culture and belonging and is one of those. Also helping to bridge the wealth gap. People of, you know, communities of color, as they transition into technology and telecommunications, we've created mentor programs to help them navigate this space, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a reskilling, you know, professional skill set and you're transitioning over here, we want to help those as well. And if you can carve out a couple hours a week or a month to come and help support this initiative, we'd love to have you. You can find us at www.xposureidc.org, actually,
.org.
on LinkedIn. So it's Xposure, no E, just the X. Find us on LinkedIn and come join us, because this work takes many hands and many ideas. And I would love to have that follow-up conversation with you, Akilah. I know we wanted to talk about the innovation, but so what happens next once you have these diverse voices and experiences join a tech organization or telecommunications organization, the impact, because it's great. It's
It is
huge.
great.
The
Yeah.
impact
No, we will have a follow-up.
reach.
No, we will have a follow-up on that, because then that is what's next. And that's really important, right? It's not just enough to talk about it, but what happens when they're there and part of your organization. And also folks can find you on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yep.
Okay,
Kelli Ballou McMillan.
great.
On LinkedIn, find me there and reach out. I actually carve out a lot of time for the people to reach out and just have a conversation. You never know where there's a synergy
Right.
and partnerships that could be developed. So I make the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Stop by anytime.